Hello everyone, welcome to the latest Futures webinar. My name is Ahmed Mahafic and I'm Education Team Lead within Bosnia and Herzegovina Futures Foundation. Today's theme of webinar is Leadership in Future Business, where we will explore the latest trends and strategies for effective leadership in digital age. I'm truly honored today to present to you our speaker, Nataša Kusmuk. Natasha is a senior Australian public servant and former CEO with proven expertise across our areas such as multicultural and indigenous affairs, stakeholder management, business and contract management, governance and risk management, and social service policy and programs. At this moment, I want to say, Natasha, thank you for being with us today, and the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. What a wonderful introduction. I might as well actually join with my video as well. Hello, everyone. I don't think I need to actually say much more about myself, except that I am currently in Western Australia, Perth, where it is 11 p.m. at night. So I'm very excited about this and hopefully we'll stay awake for the entirety of it. Why am I doing this actually is 11 o'clock at night is an interesting thing to start off with before I begin my webinar. I suppose I'm very passionate about good leadership, and in my time in being in public service, in business, in NGOs, I have some terrible management, terrible leadership. And it's actually giving me a lot of knowledge that I'd love to share with you. I'm obviously born in Sarajevo, and I came to Australia in '99. So I've been here for a long time in Perth, but I am very passionate about our young people back in Bosnia. And I very much would love to impart any knowledge I can to make them successful in business and anything else that they want to aspire to. So I'll begin very quickly by telling you that this is not about telling you what is a leader. There's different types of leaders, and I'll go into a little bit about sort of I suppose the leadership theories, what people think good leadership is. And then I'll go a little bit about what bad leadership is, and then how you can become a good leader. It is not a go-to, it's not a one-stop shop, but I'm hoping to give you some really good ideas that you can take and hopefully in your careers, in your whatever it is that you want to do in the future, you can actually implement as well. So I'll begin very easily by telling you something you already know. We have technology. So technology is pretty much the number one source of everything that we do. It's a tool that we use. We are on computers right now. We've got phones. We've got everything. So pretty much everything we do is digital. And why am I starting with this? I actually had a conversation with my brother today who actually works in the IT field. And he's 26 years old. And again, being a little bit younger than me, he's all about good leadership. If his manager's a bad manager, he will leave him. And he basically said to me, you know, technology is a tool. And as much as everyone thinks that one day the nexus will happen and we will have general artificial intelligence that replaces us all, the reality is that until that happens, even the most advanced AI is a tool, not a creator. So we are the ones as humans that create the vision, the strategy, the goals, the dreams. We are the ones that basically in computer terms who turn on the machine and provide the input. So as technology becomes more and more advanced, we kind of have to become more focused on that very human trait, which is that we are inputters. So our value as a species, as human beings, as people, is that we can inspire other people. We can deal with ambiguous problem spaces. That has led us to pretty much develop as a civilization to where we are today. So for the problems of the future, we're going to have more technology. Whether it be in business or the greater good of humanity, people's unique capabilities are required. So you think leaders would invest in developing the more human qualities? Because if we try to push for people to be robots, well, we'll be pretty bad robots. So we can be very good people at everything that comes with that. And that is inspiring other people. So I guess I'll start with a very simple thing. You know, leadership styles, they're all very different. It doesn't matter whether it's in the digital age or 200 years ago. And I don't know where we are, all of us on this webinar, whether we are actually working, studying, whether we're trying to lead something or be led by someone. But I'm sure you've seen different types of leaders. And so I wanted to begin by just going through and talking about very simple things, the leadership styles. In theory, there are 6 leadership styles that everyone sort of goes to. And I'll start with just describing scenarios of all of these. So number 1, we talk about the autocratic leadership style. You know, one person controlling all the decisions and basically doesn't really listen to people. So say, for instance, a manager in a very big company, making a lot of money, which is fantastic, might be a CEO and sitting up the top and sits down in a meeting and doesn't listen to any input. He wants to hear from you whether you have done your job, does not actually want to hear what you think should be done better. That's autocratic leadership. A person who just wants to tick the boxes, wants to make sure the KPIs are met, and doesn't really listen to the diversity of views or criticism. Number 2, you've got a visionary leader, someone who pretty much ensures a vision is achievable through strategic planning, tries to empower the staff, and sets clear goals. So someone who says to staff, hey, this is great, but I'd like you to do this. And this might be an engineer sitting on potentially a mine site that says, I'd like you to build this particular thing, and I want you to do it this way. That's someone who's a visionary leader, someone who knows how it's meant to be done and tells you how to do it. Someone who can set clear goals and tell you exactly how to do that, but empowers you a little bit and gives you all the tools. For instance, if you need a truck, he gives you a truck. If you need a computer, he gives you a computer. So a visionary leader has a bit of a vision. An affiliative leader is someone who actually adopts a people-first approach and is usually kind of effective when there's a need to mend bad feelings in a group or motivate people through a really, really stressful time or heavy workload. So an affiliative leader is someone, for instance, on a call center. So a manager at a call center who has about 100 staff making phone calls every second, and they're not very happy people. They're not happy because they don't have a break. They don't have time to talk to each other. Someone who just sits there and makes calls. So their manager, being an affiliative leader, would try to basically calm them down a little bit and say, hey, let's take a 5-minute break. Let's have lunch together. That might be an affiliative leader. Somebody who tries to look at the people that are doing the job and realizing that if the people leave, he can't do the job. He won't be an effective leader. Number 4, a democratic leader. Someone who actively involves the people they lead. So we've seen democratic leaders across the board, not so much in politics necessarily, but across the board. So these leaders are often the people that ask for feedback and input. They might encourage participation in decision-making processes. So sometimes you'll find democratic leaders are people who often in academia, for instance, will ask their subordinates or their staff to look at their work and criticize it and say, hey, how could I improve this? That's a democratic leader, someone who actually asks for feedback. A pace-setting leader often is someone who upholds a very high standard and expects their team to do the same. So their leader will set a very high pace or a very low pace, depending on the company, and expect a do as I do approach. So those kinds of leaders will often sit with their team. So a pace-setting leader, I had one actually when I started my career in the public service. I was working at the Department of Immigration in 2012. And this leader was about 60 years old and he wanted to be with the young staff, wanted to know what their stresses were. And instead of asking them, he sat down outside his office with the rest of the staff, which was very unusual at the time. And his pace-setting approach was he wanted people to not go faster than him, but didn't want people to go slower than him. And whatever processing work we were doing, he wanted to be the pace setter. Interesting leadership approach, very rarely seen these days, I think. And coaching style is something that is actually becoming more and more popular. So a style where leaders basically take on the role of a coach. And we've seen this in different sports, football, basketball, whatever sport you follow. Under this type of leadership, the leader pretty much invests their time and energy into developing each member of their staff. They will often show them how their role plays a part in the larger team. So think of a football team, whatever team you follow. I follow different teams, but let's say you're looking at international football team playing at the World Cup at football. So their coach will basically look at the entire team and say, hey, you need a bit of development. If you're a goalie, you need particular type of skills. So I will ensure that you get the right training for that. And if you are a left back or a winger, you need a different kind of approach to how you do this so that the team functions better. Because if you trained every single person in a football team the same, you would get the same kind of player. And of course, in a football team, we have very different positions. So that's something to consider. I'll just pause for a little bit there, just so you can reflect, because the next bit is a question to you. Which leadership style do you think you possess? And it's just something to ask yourself while we go through this webinar. Because when I was putting this together, I actually wanted to ask myself, well, what do I think? What do I think people see when I, lead them? Do they see someone who sets a pace and tells them to do exactly that, what I do? Or do I coach them? Do I ask for their input? The fact is, as a leader, you can't always have the same leadership style. Depending on the day, depending on the kind of company you work in, and the kind of work that you do, day to day is going to change. So your style of leadership may change with it. So one day you might be very much a coaching style, but then the next day your leadership approach might have to change completely. And you might actually have to change to an autocratic style, make a really quick decision in that moment. It's not the same every day. But generally, if I was going to say what kind of leadership style I have, I would hope I have coaching, because I think coaching style of leadership is actually really inclusive. And if I had a coaching type leader, I would be actually really happy, because that kind of leader would care about what I care about. That kind of leader would want me to be happy and stay with them. So he might, or she might invest in me or train me or ask what I actually want out of my career. If I had an autocratic leader, maybe not so much. That's someone who doesn't care about any aspect of me except me doing my job, which is really sad, because yes, you come to work for money, but that's not really the best approach to get the most out of your people. So have a good think about it before I go to the next section, because what kind of leader you think you are and what kind of leader you actually are, it doesn't matter. But what kind of leader should you aspire to be in the digital age is really why we're here. Currently, in the digital age, or the age of technology, people think that a leader needs to be 100% involved in technology. So someone who knows how to use the different platforms for communication, someone who has 2-3 laptops and 2-3 mobile phones, maybe. Who knows? I don't think that is the case. And here's why. Not all managers and directors and CEOs are leaders. They might be by their position title, but not by their action. I don't know if you think that is true. But let's consider why this is important in the digital age. So I guess I'll start with a very simple example, which is from my actual career. So some years ago, in an interview for a really senior executive role, for a CEO role, actually, at a not-for-profit, I was actually asked the question, what is my leadership style? And I had never been asked that question before. I thought, well, in the animal kingdom, we have animals that look after each other. So what animal has a good family, a good team approach for survival? Birds, maybe? Elephants? Wolves? I basically said elephants or wolves. So I sort of thought, well, look, wolves and elephants look after their sick. They make sure that they're looked after and supported. And they're not always, letting the leader at the front. Sometimes the leader actually lets the youth go at the front. And sometimes the leader is actually at the back, making sure that the weakest of the pack are actually supported and looked after. Maybe that's a really good approach. And I said to the interviewers, actually, I think my leadership style is very much like that. I lead from the back, making sure that everyone's really supported and making sure that the weakest of my team is actually the best that they can be, because you're only as strong as the weakest person in your team, right? Anyway, the interviewers were pretty pleased about my answer, and I did get the job in the end, which was really good. But why was it important that they asked this question? I've never been asked this question before. And the interviewer basically said, actually, you know what? The goal is not to hire people who want and need the job. We want to hire people who believe in what we believe and will stay long term. We want to invest in the people we hire, so the knowledge and the skills we invest in them grow and stay. If we hired people who just want the job and need the job, they would work for our money. They'll just leave afterwards. But if we hire people who believe in what we believe, they will work for blood, sweat, and tears. They will work extra. And even if we cannot give them a pay rise, for the same pay longer term, because they are passionate about the work that we do. What I've learned in my working life and career is that digital leadership is about empowering others to lead. And it's also about creating self-organized teams that optimize their day-to-day operations. So leadership is really not about hierarchy. It's not about your title as manager or director or CEO, whether you are an engineer or a lawyer or an accountant or a politician. It doesn't matter anymore. It actually needs to be focused on participation and involvement and contribution from everyone. And that sounds really silly because you think if you're spending so much time looking after people, how are you going to increase your profit margins? How will you make sure that you are leading? How will you make sure that your KPIs are met? So I wanted to give you a little bit about what I think inspired leadership in the digital age looks like. Now, these are some of the best practice things that people say that digital leadership should have. Now, it's interesting to actually look back at a couple of things. For instance, there's a gentleman called Lao Tzu who actually said, a leader is best when people barely know he exists. When his work is done, his aim fulfilled, they will say, well, we did it ourselves. So fundamentally, good leadership, just like good teamwork, is built on trust. History holds many, many examples that systems built on fear and pain have never stood the test of time. Same with leadership. So if people are afraid of their managers and of course their leaders, they probably won't work as fast or at the same pace that the manager actually wants. So a great leader really influences the best out of their people and creates an environment where happiness, success, and teamwork become habits, not exceptions. And so I started thinking, what is the trend at the moment? Because digital leadership is hard to define because it's all focused on people, of course. Why is it focused on people and not computers? Now, I don't know if you know about the McKinsey research, but at the moment, what they're saying is that emerging digital ecosystems pretty much count for more than $60 trillion in revenue by 2025. Now, that's really interesting because that is an amount of money I could not even write on a piece of paper. That's a lot of money. The role of digital leaders, McKinsey would say, is actually pretty prominent as they'll need to steer and design and build these systems and create these inclusive futures for everyone based on digital communication, based on computers. Now, that's really interesting because my list here, if you read it, talks all about people interaction and has absolutely nothing to do with the digital world. So let's go through this and actually see why. Now, there's a gentleman called Simon Sinek from the Optimism Company, and he actually had a theory very recently. There's been a couple of TEDx talks actually with him. And I thought I'd actually bring this to you because I think it's really, really interesting. He says that leaders today, especially in the digital age, who get the most out of their people are leaders who care more about their people. Leaders that have to be agile, and it's a word that you will hear a lot in business, work in an ambiguous, often cloudy environment where they cannot promise their staff anything. In some cases, they can't even offer them more money for more hours of work. They can only offer them their dreams and goals and values. So his theory, called the Golden Circle theory, actually argues that many of today's most successful companies think beyond the practical and rational benefits of their products and services they offer. So their leaders have to think beyond in terms of inspiring their staff. Now, some companies start by explaining what they offer to their customers. Big names like Apple begin by examining how and why behind their business first. So considering Apple and iPhone, the slogan is think different. And how unrecognizable this tech would be today if they just said what they actually did. We sell computers. People don't like to buy and support companies driven by profits. They don't like to buy and support people who are driven by profits. They want people who have values and beliefs, and same with companies. And this is the truth with leadership as well. I think in today's world, employees often leave managers and bad leaders, not jobs. We can all do jobs. If you think back to a lot of the study in your first year of school or your high school, or even your tertiary education, if some of you are still studying, you do this not because you like to do it, but you can do it. It's a job. Learning is a job. Now, if you thought back and you thought of a really horrible teacher or a lecturer you've had, you wish to just leave them. Because sometimes teachers and lecturers who are not connected to their students, just like leaders in business, actually lose their attention. They lose the students' trust. They actually lose their students who then go on to fail their subjects. So technically, when you think about it, in jobs, people can do any kind of job. They can input numbers into a spreadsheet, they can build skyscrapers, roads, lead a whole entire country. But today's world, employees leave bad leaders, not their jobs. They leave because their leaders fail to inspire them to believe in their work and the value of their work. And of course, they don't understand what they do and why they do it anymore. Good leaders make you believe that you coming to work means something way more than your paycheck. So when you think about it, people believe in why you do something, not what you do. So for instance, in my job, at the moment, I advise on issues to do with Southeast Asia. It doesn't tell you very much of what I do. And I work for the Australian government in a organization or department that is called the Australian Trade and Investment Commission. It doesn't tell you much about what I do. What I do every day is very boring, very menial. If I told you about the amounts of meetings that I attend, that doesn't really tell you what I do. The amount of emails that I send, that doesn't even tell you what I do. But why I do it is different. I do it to benefit the economy, the people, the community. I do it because I'm passionate about business and investment and trade. That might get you a bit more excited. So inspired leadership in the digital age pretty much needs to look at these things, and I've listed them here. So we need to pretty much look at ensuring well-being of team members. What does that actually mean? So in my job, ensuring well-being of team members pretty much means that I look at each team member as an individual. I don't look at my team and go, hang on, we all need to do this because this one goal needs to be achieved. It's actually looking at the different parts, just like a football team. I have several team members, and in my team, I've got one person who might be the goalie of the team. And I need to inspire them differently. I need to make sure that they're skilled to be a goalie. That pretty much says that I'm ensuring the well-being of my team. If you look at turning weaknesses into strengths, that's a very simple statement, but it doesn't really tell you what that means. So turning weaknesses into strengths pretty much means if we fail together. But we don't look at it as failure. We look at it as a learning opportunity. So I just wanted to point out that there are two leadership failures, something that I've actually seen every single job that I've had in the last 12 years. There are two leadership failures. One is that bad leadership is best identified by the people they lead. As leaders, if you've got staff or teams or people that you are leading that are unhappy, unsuccessful, unfulfilled, then that is a really good indicator of a bad leader or bad leadership. But the second thing is also people may be really happy under your leadership, but if the profits and KPIs and the projects aren't looking good, they're not being achieved, that is also called bad leadership. Now, this is not to be confused that bad leadership means that there are bad people. They can be fantastic, very friendly, lovely people, but they may not be good leaders because they don't do several of these things. And no leader can do everything all at once every day. But this is basically an idea of how to strive for good leadership. So I suppose I'll look at it a little bit more broadly and a little bit in terms of what sectors, what jobs this actually applies for. But let's look at it this way. If you read all of this, what comes to mind? Who comes to mind? Who comes to mind as a good leader? Do we have someone like this in the world? I can think of a few names, and I'm going to share them with you in a little bit. But let's very quickly run through this list. So I've said ensures well-being of team members, turns weaknesses into strengths, builds and maintains trust, takes responsibility and accountability and celebrates success, someone who motivates people to innovate, leads transformation, works best with stakeholders, helps build careers, not jobs, and ensures psychological safety of staff. Someone who anticipates problems and has a high-risk appetite. It's not afraid to take the next step and try something new. He's not afraid to support people through difficult times, and someone who identifies growth opportunities both for the team and the individuals. Someone who manages up and not down. That is the leader that does not push work down to the lower staff, but someone who actually takes on the work and pushes it up to his or her boss. Someone who represents the team proudly and takes ownership of failure. Someone who says, well, if my team fails, then I fail because I'm their leader. I should have known better. I should have supported them better. Someone who protects the team from threats. Now that sounds pretty utopian, I think. So what does this mean for different positions and industries? Because I don't know about you, if you are in a particular industry or a particular job at the moment, or a particular job that you'd like to get into. But let's look at a couple of those major professions. Let's start with something very, very simple. Law. It's not very simple. It's very hard to get into, and obviously takes a lot of years to get into. But let's have a think. Lawyers. What is a good lawyer? Is that someone who leads a company and has a lot of money? Or is a good lawyer someone who can get results? Usually the latter, someone who can get results. How about mining and government and agriculture and accounting and engineering and IT? Is that the same case? When we think of good leaders, we think Bill Gates, we think all the CEOs of those big companies that we hope to one day work for, like Amazon and maybe Twitter, maybe Facebook, maybe Apple, who knows? I think this idea of digital leadership applies to all professions. I know that there's a lot of engineers that are part of this foundation, so I thought I'd actually give you a little bit of an idea of why this, I suppose, theory works on engineers and engineering. As an engineer today, things are a little difficult because it's no longer enough to be good at mathematics or designing or invention or innovation or even executing a project. Now, as a leader in engineering fields across the world, especially in the Western world, you need to be able to tell a story. So like in most industries, for instance, a civil engineer needs to be able to sell their brand and be able to share to the world why their business is the best fit for their project. And when it comes to having a project funded or evaluated, they need to be able to tell a story about what made their project successful. So yes, numbers are important, but qualitative data and marketing jargon and report writing is now a bigger aspect of what a leader in this industry actually has to possess. So aside your ability to report and market your outcomes, you also need to have communication skills which place you in good stead with funding bodies and sponsors and customers and clients. So let's have a think. Engineering. When you think engineering, you think buildings and roads and machinery. You don't think about the human interaction all the time. You think it's about maths, it's about the numbers, it's about designing and building something. But a leader in engineering actually spends most of their time being a communicator, someone who actually communicates to those who will fund those projects, who he or she may sell the projects to, and someone who actually designs these things and says, hey, my company is the best one for your project, and this is why. Someone who can actually market. Now, last time I checked, when we study engineering in school, at universities, they don't teach us marketing. They teach us engineering. There's something to think about. Now, as industries such as these become really complex, a mine site, for instance, now includes every type of profession, from an engineer to a health and safety professional, a lawyer, an accountant, even a medically trained officer. So communication definitely becomes an invaluable skill for workers and leaders in a mine site. Working closely, for instance, in my profession with the West Australian Police and several police officers of a very high rank, right up to the commissioner, I have to tell you, the best leaders who were admired and supported, and I suppose therefore really consistent in reputation for their success, were those who exhibited those democratic and coaching and inclusive approaches of leadership. Now, when you think of a commissioner of police, someone I worked with, you don't think of someone who asks your opinion on how the law should be executed, or how you should arrest someone, or who you should hire in your organization. You're a police officer. You can do whatever you like as long as you uphold the law. You think of a police officer, someone who is physically trained, is capable of using handguns, for instance, or handcuffs, or whatever it is. You don't think of someone who is very good at communicating all the time, because they don't have to be. They're there to enforce the law. But in leadership, in agencies such as the police, in the Western world, what I've seen, especially in Australia, even America and Canada, and believe it or not, in places like Hong Kong and Malaysia, the highest of police leadership actually exhibit those inclusive leadership approaches. Even though now we live in such a digitalized age that police no longer are policing in the way that you see it in movies, it is beyond this. It is now pretty much about 75% of how they do their work, how they are called out to their job in the Western world, is actually using technology, using different types of technology. And even when they're out policing, they are using different types of technology, from cars to helicopters to underwater policing. There is so much going on, and it is all digitized. Even their report writing is no longer verbal. It is actually all written down on a computer, on a system, on a recording system that actually says what they did on that job and whether it's finished. So they use all sorts of technologies to actually do policing type work. But they don't necessarily need to just know the physical aspects of the job. So let's go a bit backwards. So I said leading from the back. That was my answer when I was at the interview. So what does that actually mean? Well, when I said leading from the back, I referred to an elephant or a wolf pack, and basically talked about how I would hope that as a leader, I can support the weakest of my team, and I can be really, really proactive at making sure that the young members of my team are upskilled and inspired to do more. Because one day I will leave that leadership position, and I would hope that someone better and smarter than me would actually take up the role. So I suppose it means someone who really observes the situation of their team and their work and their profession, and is able to really employ that almost conflict resolution in such a way that their team feels supported and strong, and they trust that their word and action of their leaders, but also someone who can actually say, hey, hang on, you might be a leader, but I think you've got this wrong. And they don't have the fear that their leader will actually fire them or exclude them. So someone who spends more time coaching and mentoring and collaborating on setting goals with their team, someone who can get their team to believe what they believe, and pretty much a good portion of their time is also spent in self-development, self-assessing and learning, someone who can learn from their team. Because remember, when we go into a workplace, whether you're in government or law or policing or engineering or accounting, there is someone who's been there longer, someone who has more experience than you, always, no matter whether you're a leader or not. So your whole job in digital leadership is to learn everything you can from everyone around you. Because as a digital leader, what you can do is you can go online and find out anything you like. You can find out what happened in the 16,000s. You can find out what's happening in the world, across the world today, in the Middle East or America. You can find out any information you like. But what you can't do is find out about those human-to-human interactions that you can learn only on the job working with other people. So by learning and growing, what does this actually create? So I think the best way to explain this is that it creates a really positive organizational culture where essentially people come to work not just for the money, but because they enjoy their job and they feel that they're heard and they contribute and they feel like they're doing more than what they're paid for. So when someone asks you, what do you do for a living? And you say, well, I work in IT. I'm a leader in IT. I actually have a startup. You want to feel proud of yourself and you want to be able to say, hey, this is what I do. I lead this kind of work. A good leader will make you believe that. You don't necessarily have to be a CEO of that company to believe that if you have a good leader. Now, for those of us who work full time, I certainly do. We pretty much spend about a third of our working life at work, working away from things we love to do. Now, I love having a cup of coffee in the morning, and I love spending time with my family and friends. I love going out. I love traveling. That's all time away from that, sleeping, partying, whatever it is that you like to do. A third of your working life, if you're working full time, will be spent away from the things you love doing. So going to work should actually be a rational decision for most employees because we need money to live. But sometimes we say we do not like our work. We're stressed about our boss. It just doesn't feel right. We don't like it. We don't want to do this anymore. So if that's considered bad leadership, someone or a position in your organization or the work that you do or your study or even someone in your community who makes you feel kind of like, I don't really want to do this anymore, then who are the great leaders in the digital age, in your opinion? Because if we're looking for the ideal leader in the digital age, it's very hard to find them without describing those special traits that some people like Mahatma Gandhi, for instance, had, or Nelson Mandela. And I'll go into this a little bit because I think it's really, really important. Nelson Mandela was often seen as one of the greatest leaders of all time. And a lot of people will obviously contest this. They've got their different views, but let's not talk about politics. Let's think about why Nelson Mandela exhibited good leadership. And then let's see, would he be a good leader in the digital age? Nelson Mandela often was said that he basically was the kind of leader that walked the walk. So a kind of leader that had a vision and pretty much his actions inspired others to do more than he did. So he started off with his personal battle towards something he believed was right. And pretty much the whole country and the whole world backed him and did more. Now, in the digital age, we've got computers and technology that basically connect us with the whole entire world. So would Nelson Mandela be a leader, well, I suppose a great leader in the digital age, in your opinion? I think so. And here's why. I think today's best leaders are not those that spend all their time on their phones. They're actually the kind of people who are humble and they're able to accept feedback and acknowledge the others around them who know more than they do. They're also adaptable and they accept that change is constant, and then changing their minds based on new information is actually a strength, not a weakness. They're also visionary. They have a clear sense of long-term direction. They're not about those short-term goals. And they're engaged. They have a willingness to listen and interact and communicate with internal and external stakeholders, combined with a really strong sense of interest and curiosity in emerging trends, and they want to follow those trends. They're also very hyper-aware, and they're constantly scanning the internal environment, looking at the outside world and thinking, how can my business grow and how can my staff improve? They're also good at making informed decisions. They make use of data. Now, that's the first time I've said that a leader in the digital age needs to use technology, data, and information to make evidence-based decisions. Data is an interesting one, actually, because when we think about it, data is not about being used simply as a tool that you say, hey, this is what the data says. As a leader these days, it's actually really interesting because data is actually used to prove that you are doing the right thing. And what I mean by that is, recently I had a conversation with someone who has a startup, and they're a very small startup, has very little money, but they love what they're doing. So they've been doing this for a little while, for about 2 years. And they actually said to me, our data shows that we have a lot of clients on the horizon. We will continue doing what we do because there's a lot of people who believe in us. And the gentleman who was actually speaking was not the CEO. He was actually one of the very new staff. The CEO was very quiet the entire time. And I said, oh, well, you're the founder. You're the founder of this, startup. Tell me a little bit more. What will you need to do as a leader in the digital age to make sure your organization succeeds? I mean, startups are a very difficult thing to work with. And he said to me, well, as you can see, I am learning from my staff. I'm recruiting the best staff I can. I'm using their diversity of views, diversity of language. We've got people in this startup that speak 4 or 5 different languages. We actually have a couple of remote employees that work overseas. So while I work in Australia, there's 2 of my employees that work in India and in America, and one even works in Sweden. So that means we actually cover the entire world as this little startup to do all of these things. And yeah, look, we're not making a lot of money yet, but my staff believe in what we're doing, and that is the most important thing. Now, in this startup, there's about 24 staff. It's a global company dealing in IT platforms. And now I'm not an expert on IT, but the only time he said that he used data was to basically say, we're doing this for the right reasons. So he said the data shows us that we have customers and clients on the horizon. So that means he's actually been using the information from his different staff, his different offices, his different knowledge platforms to basically say, are we doing the right thing still? So his kind of leadership is incredibly informed. So he's hyper aware and he's constantly scanning this internal and external environment for opportunities and threats. I thought he was also engaged. He was willing to listen and interact and communicate with all his stakeholders, including his staff. And he had a vision. He knew what they were working for. He was very humble because he wasn't the first one to speak. He also didn't speak very long for that meeting at all. Interestingly enough, he was adaptable because he said he has had different jobs and different roles. And he basically thinks that every time a new piece of information comes in, whether it's his junior staff member that tells him or his senior, he does something about it. He doesn't sit there and goes, that sounds nice. He actually does something about it. He's action orientated. And finally, aside from making good informed decisions, he's actually really quick. So he's come to the peak of his career in IT and decided to start his own startup. But his actual job wasn't in coding. His job was actually selling. His whole job was about sales. So he knows exactly how quickly he needs to act to win over a customer. He doesn't let his staff do the hard work. He does the hard work. And I thought that was actually a really good example of great leadership as a startup in IT. Because often when you think of IT leaders, you think of big CEOs doing big presentations and doing big things. And that's not great leadership always. Now, before I finish up with key takeaways, because I have a few more things to say, I wanted to actually have a think about, the different things that have happened over the last few years and things that are going to disrupt good leaders, things that are challenges. So the World Bank in 2019 actually reported They did a report called The Changing Nature of Work. Now, this was, of course, before the pandemic, when everyone could work remote. And it was interesting because it contained interesting observations about IKEA, the Swedish furniture retail giant, which took 30 years after its founding in 1943 to actually start expanding into Europe. It reported revenue, I think, of about $42 billion after 7 decades. But however, the Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba reached 1 million users in just 2 years. It actually accumulated more than 9 million online merchants and annual sales of $700 billion in 15 years using just digital technology. So let's quickly unpack that a little bit. IKEA being a furniture giant, a Swedish company, they did a lot of physical things. So they sold physical furniture to people in person. Alibaba is actually an online e-commerce platform, and they actually managed to get more money in a very short amount of time because they used digital technology. Interesting, because as we move more and more to an online space, especially after the pandemic now, coronavirus obviously threw everything out in the Western world, especially, and I think globally, and our ideas of working. Most recently, I actually was told by a business in Australia who basically they were expanding into Southeast Asia, and they stopped during the COVID pandemic. They actually stopped making money. They were about to shut down, and their leader basically said, let's just go slow, and let's cut away some stuff, and let's move away from how we've been doing what we've been doing, and let's think about what's happening right now. And so they actually assessed what was happening, and instead of selling and doing things the way they did, they moved their entire business model in about 6 to 12 months' time fully online. Within 12 months, the world was in chaos and we were all working from home. This particular company was actually an education giant. They provided education courses to so many international students. I think the last count was about 30,000 students. And had they not moved to a fully online platform, they would have gone bust. They would have had to close their business. Now, their leader was someone who observed the environment, someone who looked at their staff and said, well, actually, if we let go of all our staff, we'd have no one to actually teach, no one who can actually provide the service. So instead of letting go of our staff, how about we change the model of operating? What's happening out there? Okay, well, everyone's working online. Why don't we do the same? And so this leader actually did something a little bit different. But then disruptions in the digital world often occur at a very phenomenal rate, and it's not just the pandemic. Things that we have to worry about at the moment that have the power to impact entire industries, all sectors, from all regulators to policymakers, governments, banks, digital leaders, need to be constantly analyzed because there are risks. And over the past few years, there's actually been stories about Facebook, for instance, Facebook security breaches and privacy policies and data sharing. There's been banks and phone companies in Australia, for instance, recently, who had millions of users who were exposed to serious concerns, even stolen information, identities, ID documents. Now, that's a scary thought. We live in a digital economy, and this is the sort of issue that digital leadership needs to be able to tackle head on. So being a bit of a hands-on leader in the digital age pretty much means that leaders need to create systems that ensure transparency and a thorough audit of these kinds of processes at the highest ethical standards. Dealing with personal data and privacy of individuals and corporate information pretty much means that you need to be really tuned in on what's happening. So in a world driven by devices and technology, how you lead people will make the critical difference. Leaders in this new age need to inspire and engage and lead with optimism. Technology can play a huge role to reduce things like racial and gender and economic inequalities for vast numbers of people. But by empowering others to pinpoint and solve critical problems, and digital leaders will have the power to shape the future of our world. So in the digital age, leaders need to focus less on the doing but more on why they're doing it. So to take away a little bit before I sort of get into some questions, is just to give you a moment to think. I'm just going to take a pause before I sort of wrap it up and tell you why I've been telling you all of this. I hope you've had a thought, because here's my takeaway. A leader in the digital age is focused on preserving positive communication in teams and the people-to-people connection. Because as we are going more remote and we're going online and we're trying to work more and more and more using our online devices and our computers and our phones and Zoom and WebEx and Teams, we actually need to go back to the basics that make every single company work. We need to invest in human capital through coaching and mentoring. We need to empower individuals to take the lead. We need to promote that collaborative and collective effort and success, because we don't have time to think of everything by ourselves. We need to actually use the power and diversity beyond what we are. If we harness the knowledge of 5 people as opposed to 1, we're actually better for it. And we need to reflect on our own weaknesses and learn to improve as leaders. Because if we don't learn, we can't grow as the world changes. So the more you learn every day, the better it is for you. And ensure a work culture where diversity of views and ideas is harnessed. And what I mean by that is, if you have a work culture that's focused on good, positive leadership, that work culture will mean that instead of pointing out weaknesses of people or differences in people or bad things about the company, people are actually focused on how do we make everything better? How do we improve? How do we support someone to make us look good? That is good leadership. And I think in the digital age, as a takeaway from me, no matter whether you work in government, in mining, in accounting, in policing, whether you're building cars or you're, I suppose, doing anything else, whether you're skydiving or you are trying to launch a rocket into the sky, you actually need people to help you succeed in your vision. And as a leader in the digital age, if you can't communicate with those people, you're actually a bad leader and you need to work on that. So that's my key takeaway from today's webinar. And I'd love to hear your thoughts and hear some questions from you, actually, because there is a lot that I didn't get a chance to mention, but I hope I opened up your minds to the possibilities.
Thank you so much, Natasha, for this amazing presentation and amazing lecture. I hope that everyone enjoyed it. And now we are going to the Q&A part of this webinar. And while we're waiting for the questions, my question would be, we talked a little bit about remote work and hybrid work and who knows what the future holds for us. But what kind of leader is the best, if there is a best, when it comes to, let's say, the hybrid or remote work? What aspects and what positions and skills should on a leader that manages on a hybrid firm or a completely remote firm have?
Oh God, that's a great question. That is a great question. I hope someone would actually ask the question about remote work. I'll start very, very practically with me. I have actually been a remote worker for nearly 2 years now, and I've previously worked remotely for a couple of months here and there. And I have been under really bad leaders sometimes. And what made them bad was that they didn't understand that just because I'm online doesn't mean I'm engaged. And that doesn't mean that I'm doing not enough work. It actually means that maybe I'm not connected to the work that I'm doing. Now, I have to say, I'm very proactive, and I'll call my manager and say, hey, I don't understand something. But not every person in a team is the same. So in companies that are big, so if you have a team of 10, yeah, of course you'll talk to people. But if you have a huge organization of 100,000 people or 1,000 people, you will actually find that those people aren't talking, they're not connecting. So when I talk about harnessing things like knowledge and diversity of views and collective efforts and all of those key inclusive coaching and mentoring methods, you can't coach and sort of mentor people when they're remotely working if you're not speaking to them directly. So what that means is, I suppose as a good leader in a remote work situation, I've actually find that a good leader on a day-to-day is someone who is immersed in the technology, uses it as a tool. So someone who communicates with purpose and provides that direction. So someone who basically might have a every week or every day 15-minute check-in with their staff and go, how are we going? What are the issues? Can I help someone with something? Are we falling behind in our targets? Do we need to do something more? I had a great leader actually during the pandemic who was able to actually inspire me to not be freaked out by the whole concept of the pandemic, because I thought once the pandemic hit, I would lose my job. But no, that didn't happen. He said, just keep at it. We're going to learn together. And once we learn together, we'll make it work. And we actually increased our profits during the pandemic, which was unheard of. And why that happened is because this leader came right down to the level and said, I don't know anything about pandemics or managing during pandemics. Help me figure it out. And soon after that, I actually myself had to lead an organization of about 100 staff from a fully physical office into a remote work situation. And some of them were over the age of 60. They've never actually worked on a laptop full time. They've never used technology to do their work. And that was a challenge for me. But what I found was the best advice I can give as a leader in that space was talk to your people in whatever way they feel comfortable and use their knowledge, use their skills. Not everyone is good at using technology, but you might have to be to help them out. So I hope that answers your question. It is a very difficult one, but I don't think the remote work and working from home situation is going to end anytime soon. So leaders really need to learn how to harness that to make us even better and more efficient.
So much for your answer. You answered it perfectly. So you mentioned the profitability, and now I have the question: how can leaders balance the need for profitability with the ethical and the social consideration in future business?
It's a fantastic question. I actually recently went to an event which was in honor of International Anti-Discrimination Day. We call it Harmony Day here in Australia. It's a rebrand. Um, and it was interesting because people said, there are people in my organization, they don't believe in diversity and including people. And as you know, Australia is a very diverse country, multicultural country, lots of different religious views, people from all over the world. And in my own team, I actually have people from India and the Middle East and Southeast Asia. I have someone who was born in South Africa, very different people. And how do you manage all those different people without telling them exactly what you want them to do? Because they're all going to do it differently. It's hard because when people think of profits, they think that everyone has to do the same to get to the end target. But as we know, we're all at different stages of life. So for instance, I might be faster at using a computer than my mum, but that doesn't mean that my mum is bad at her job. So my mum might be better at something else because she might be faster at communicating with people in person than I am. She might be more confident. If I was a manager managing me and my mum, I would actually put me in front of a computer to do the computer-based tasks, but I'd actually put my mum to actually go speak to the people in person. What I mean by that is we can't balance profits and KPIs and neglect the diversity of people, because diversity is actually the best thing we've got to ensure that we're more productive. So when I said recently that I actually had staff who come from different countries, they also speak different languages. And I actually found recently that that came in really handy. So instead of giving them the same jobs, I actually made sure that we split them up. So those that actually had a passion for a particular part of the world, they were working on that. People who had language skills for that particular part of the world, they were working on those particular areas of the world. And that actually increased our profit margins. That actually increased our outputs. That actually increased our outcomes completely, which is strange because you think if you're constantly trying to balance how people are feeling and making sure that no one's unhappy and you want to make sure that they're included, you're spending a lot of time on the human aspect of it. But by doing that, you're actually investing on those people. And at the beginning of my presentation, I said input. We are inputters into the work that we do. So I was actually investing into the inputters, the people that would actually, in the end, increase my profit margins. So to answer it simply, diversity equals profits. So if you are a good leader that can include diversity and harness it, make it your strength, you can actually increase profits and KPIs, and you can act ethically without losing money. And that's a really difficult thing to do, but once you master it, it's actually really, really good.
Thank you for this amazing answer. It really cleared some things up for me. We don't have any more questions right now. I'm sure that if any of our attendees have any questions, that you can message you on LinkedIn or something.
Oh,
Uh,
of course.
and I just want to say thank you so much for your time. I know it's really now it's like midnight, I think, in Perth, and
Almost, yes.
just want to say thank you for joining us today, and I hope that we will meet in Sarajevo quite soon, and that you will hopefully enjoy meeting us, and
Definitely.
and the work that foundation does, and that will be all.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
No,
so
appreciate it.
we will keep in touch, and I hope to hear from you soon. Bye.
Definitely. Goodbye.